Hello there. Today we're going to take a deep dive into transitions in DaVinci Resolve 18. Let's get started. All right, so here we are in DaVinci Resolve. And I'm sure the sharp-eyed among you are noticing that I no longer have shelves of canned goods behind me. I was finally able to get that shelf out of here. So a big thank you and shout out to Mrs. Fuzzee D, who was mostly responsible for moving that shelf. I can't do much stuff like that due to health issues. So it was really nice to get that out of here and be able to get a little nicer backdrop. All right, that's it. So you'll notice I've got 3 pieces of just stock footage here from pexels.com, and we're going to learn how to do some transitions between them. So I'm going to start you off with some basic stuff. So you can kind of do a fake transition. So if we go to the end of one of these bars here, you'll see this little white thing pops up in between arrowheads. We can actually take that and drag it, and you'll see there's a little readout for the number of seconds there, or frames and seconds I should say. And there we go. I had to wait for that little mouse thing to fade. Okay, so we can set how long we want that fade, and then if we go right to the very beginning, that's basically a fade to black or fade from black. And we can do the same at the other end. So if we take this one here and we go say 15 frames, so my timeline is 30 frames a second. Now we can take this other one here and set it for 15 frames. Now this isn't really a transition, but it can be used as one kind of in a second. So you'll just see where it fades to black and then fades back up with the next one. Okay. A lot of people use that. It's perfectly serviceable. Now we can take that a step further, and we can actually take this and overlap it a little bit here. So we're basically going to create a 15 frame overlap. Okay, so now when we play it, you'll see it kind of fades from one to the other instead of fading to black. So that is kind of a basic transition type of a concept. But there's an easier way to do this. So let's get rid of those. So if we look over here, first of all, if you don't already have it on, you need to turn on your effects library. So, and then we get these, and we're going to click on video transitions. And now these first sets of transitions, these are all categorized, and they all kind of belong to the same kind of master tool. You'll see once we select one of these and use it, we can actually change it from the properties inspector, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we can scroll across this effect here, and if you look over on our screen, you can see it'll show you a kind of a preview of what that transition is going to look like as you scrub along the tool. So this way you don't have to actually take and install every single one to try it out. This will give you kind of a preview of what it's going to look like. Okay, so now we can just pick one of these. So let's take our blur dissolve, and we want to drop it between these 2 videos. But watch what happens when I try and drop it on there. It didn't do anything. Okay, now the reason for that is these clips need to actually overlap for a transition to take effect. So what we're going to have to do is manually add it. So we'll take this, and as we move it to the left, it's going to tell us how much of an overlap we've got. And before I actually move this, I just want to touch on, when you're doing these overlaps, it's best to do an overlap that's an even number of frames. So if we want a 15 frame transition, then we're going to move it actually 16 frames, because it can't really land halfway between two frames very easily. So it's just easier to do that extra frame if you've got an uneven number. So we're going to take this and we're going to drag it. You know, you can see it showing how far we've drug it. But we don't want to go quite that far, so we're going to go to that 16 frames. And then we're going to grab this in the middle, see how our little tool changes. So this, see if I move a little bit to the right, you'll see that tool changes to like a single-sided thing. And same thing if I go too far the other way. So we want it where it's that double-ended in the middle. And we're just going to drag that back 8 frames, which is half of the 16. Now this is why we have to do it an even number. So now that we've got this little overlap, now we can drag this over and drop it on between. Now you see how it's got that little white box that showed up. And then you can actually select that and it'll highlight it. So we're going to move our playhead over top of it just so we can see what's going on. And let's select that, and then we're going to go up here on the right. And if your inspector panel is not already open, you just click right here to open it. And I'm just going to shorten this panel so it's only half height. It just makes it easier for when I'm doing tutorials. Okay, so you can see up here we've got our transition type, and then we can pop this little list down, and then you've got all these different options. And all these options you're seeing in here correspond to the list of transitions we had over here. So if we go back over here real quick and we scroll on our list, you can see all these categories with different transitions in them, including this user category. Now the user ones won't be in that list there, but that's okay. So basically everything that's in here except for user, and when you hit fusion transitions, that's where it stops. But all these ones before that are available from this drop-down list over here on the right. So we can go down and we can choose a different one. So we could go box. And now if we scroll it back and forth a little bit, you can see how that's a little different transition. And you just make sure we've got that selected again. And now at this point, if you wanted to resize that, you can't really make it any bigger because of how much overlap, but you could make it smaller. And you can do that here. You can drag it, or you can come up here and change your duration. And you can change that in either seconds or frames. And some of these different types will give you some different options that'll show up. So for this, you can change your box mode. So if we change it to upper left, then you'll see how it comes in from the upper left corner like that. So you've got all these options. Now I'm not going to go through all the options with you on this tutorial. I'm just going to show you where to find this stuff and some of the more popular options that people choose. And then you can play with it from there. I will caution you when you're starting to use these transitions, it's very tempting to use a bunch of different transitions and kind of get fancy. And you can do that, and it's something that's quite common to people when they're first starting out. But you'll find over time that from a perspective of your workflow, how fast you can get projects done, and what looks good, how much overlap you require, that kind of thing. It's all a consideration when you're cutting your videos together. And you find that some of the fancier transitions, although they look pretty cool, don't lend themselves well to more professional productions. But if you're doing stuff for YouTube or for family, you know, get crazy. But you probably want to try and stick with 1 or 2 transitions in a project and not use 20 different transitions. It can get pretty distracting. Really, your main goal is to make it the best experience for the person that's viewing the video. So that's kind of where you need to keep your mindset when you're deciding on what to use. Okay, so we can take a look at ones from a couple different categories. So we could go to, let's say a common one that you've probably seen lots of is the clock wipe. You know, this is used in a few of the Star Wars movies. And then we've got I've got some kind of your more fancier stuff here. And you'll notice that all these options can change based on the transition type that you've chosen. Now I just want to pick another one here. Let's go a push. And if we look at this one, some of the common options that people use, they can set a border. And then we could set a little fancy color for that border. So some people use that. Now you'll notice that if we just let this actually play, it's just a basic linear transition. It goes from one spot to the next, just in a straight line, which is kind of boring and a little bit unnatural. Nature usually doesn't work that way, so we've got a choice. We can do something called easing. So we'll pop this little list down and we can have it ease in, which means it's going to come in slow and leave fast. Out is exactly the opposite, and in and out, that's going to come in slow, go fast, and then go out slow. And that's a very popular one. So let's take a look at the difference now. We just play this again. So you see how that just plays a lot more natural looking. Personally, I think it looks a lot better, but it's up to you what you want to use. And this little tool, I'm going to show you a neat little trick at the end, kind of a bonus thing, that you can use this tool to animate other tools. So, and I'll show you that at the end, just stick around. Okay, now the other thing to keep in mind when you're using movement like this, if we watch as it's moving through, we're still getting that little bit of an unnatural look, because normally when something moves in front of the camera, it blurs a little bit. We call this motion blur. So right here, we're going to give this a little bit of motion blur. So the faster it's moving, the more that blur is going to be applied. So because of the transition easing points we've chosen, it's going to be the fastest right in the middle. So we'll pick a blur that we think is appropriate for that fastest of speeds. And then you'll notice as we get to the slower part of the transition, that blur gets less and less until it stops completely. And then you can, if you want to try and get fancy with your transition curves, you can do a little animating here, but probably you're not going to be wanting to play with that when you first get started. Now, one of the options that we have here as well with this transition is our preset. So we can have it push left, we can have it push right. I will say that when they were creating this tool, at some point, somebody got it backwards. So when you select right, it actually goes left, and vice versa. Up and down still works correctly. and I guess they've decided it just wasn't worth the squeeze to go fix it. So just something to be aware of when you're using this tool. It could get a little confusing at first. So you'll notice as we change that, then it completely changes the feel of that transition. And then you've got, once again, all these other options. Another one that's fairly popular is the Venetian blind. Now this one can be a little bit processor intensive, and maybe we want to get rid of the border for this one. Now you notice we've also got an option on some of these. Let's go back to our push, and you'll see one of the options we've got is feather. So we've got a little checkbox here. So if we actually give us a border again, but if we want that to just be a feathered edge instead, we just click on that. And instead of having a border, then we've got this kind of an edge transition that gives it like a smooth fade from one to the other. So the next thing I want to show you with transitions is we can set up some presets. So let's say we've got this one here that we've set up. We've got it as our 16 frames duration, and we've got the settings that we like. So now what we can do is we can right click on this and we can say create transition preset. Now I've already got a bunch of presets done like this, so I'm not going to actually follow through with creating this. But once you create that preset, then if we go over here to our list and we scroll down, remember I showed you that user section that wouldn't be included in the drop down list on the right? So if we go in here and we take a look, so here's some of the other ones that I've created. So here we've got this smooth cut 4-frame. This one's actually kind of a favorite of mine. It's a very quick transition. It kind of morphs from one to the next. I use this one a lot. But what we can do is once we've created a preset that we like, now let's just delete this one. So all I did was click on it to highlight it, hit the backspace key. And then I can take this smooth cut and I can bring that over and I can drop it on. I notice because that's only 4 frames, you don't see much here in this little box. So now if we just watch that real quick, so you see it just kind of does that morphing effect. Now what I did is I did an extra step. Because I use this one so much, I want this to be kind of a default transition for me. So you notice it's got like this little red highlight in the corner. What that means is this is now a default preset. So I can right click on this and I can go set as standard transition. Okay. Now what this does for me is it makes life a little easier. Now here, I don't have to go over here and grab a smooth cut and drag it on as a transition. Now because I've made it a default, I can right click on this space right when I get that little double-headed movement arrow thing. I don't know what the proper name is, sorry. And now I get a list that pops up, and here's the default version of it that I created, and then these are some other ones that it gives you access to from the little drop down. So then all I have to do is select that 4-frame one, job done. It makes it really easy. So you can make that whatever settings you want and make that your default transition, and then it's really easy to drop it into place. Now I'm going to show you another cool trick. So if we highlight this transition, we get rid of it. And let me show you another neat little trick. So if we go over to this one, now we didn't create an overlap, but because I've created this as a default transition, I can right click here, choose the 4-frame, And now it pops up this little window. It says, some of the selected clips have insufficient handles. To apply the transition, you can choose to trim your clips, blah, 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 blah. So what they're telling us here is I can either cancel the operation, I can skip it, or I can tell it to trim. Now the reason we have so many options on this is we can use it to apply to multiple transitions simultaneously. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. That's our bonus. Okay, so now we can just click on trim clips. So it trimmed that for us and applied that transition. So now I'm just gonna hit Control Z, we'll undo that. And let's actually get rid of this overlap. You'll notice when I'm changing this overlap, you'll see that kind of that little white outline box. That's basically showing you where the ends of that overlap are. And if you're just going one direction, when you click on it, it'll show you how far that one can go that you're moving, like so. So in this case, we're just going to grab this. I'm going to drag it off. Bring these clips back out to full length. Snap it into place. So now I'm going to show you how to do this little bonus thing. So we're going to select all the clips we want to apply this to. And now we're going to go over here to the left. We're going to select our transition. And I'm going to right click. And I'm going to choose Add to Selected Edit Points and Clips. And then we get this same little question pops up. So we're going to go Trim Clips. Poof, did them all at once. Now the one little caveat to this is if you look at the very end of each one, it added an extra transition in there and we don't need it. So we'll just select that and delete it. Now normally you wouldn't be using this for just 3 clips. You'd be selecting, you know, maybe a dozen or something and doing them all at once. So that's a pretty cool little bonus trick. And now we've got one last thing we're going to take a look at here, and that is our fusion transitions. So these have a little more power available to them. Now some of these can get pretty fancy. Once again, we can do we can put our playhead in the middle there, and we can do a little bit of trying this out. Now you can see some of these look exactly the same as what was available on the other options, but they've got a lot more capabilities. So initially the default form might look pretty similar, but it's got a lot more things it can do. So we could pick, say, this tunnel of light. So we could either drag it on or we can double click it. Oh, I guess this you can only do the double click or the drag if you've created an overlap. But we right click and go add to selected points and clips. Now you notice it didn't actually ask us if we wanted to trim the clips, because we only had one selected, so it just assumed we wanted it on the inside. So another little something to be aware of. So now if we select these 2 clips, and then if I right click on this, add to selected edit points, now it'll ask me if I want to trim the clips, and boom. So these can be a little more interesting. And once again, you can select your transition and you can come up here to your transition tab and you've got some things you can adjust. Now there's a couple extra special ones down at the bottom here. So I'm just going to delete these other ones real quick. So this is kind of a neat one here. This is actually quite configurable. You can really change this burn away effect. So let's just drop this on here. So if you want to change the angle that this does the transition at, you can once again come over here to your inspector, and here's your main angle. Now you've got some choices. You can choose directional, hotspots, or path. So if I choose hotspots, now it's going to act totally differently. So it's going to start from these little central spots. So we can come in here and we can change our duration. We could set up our alignment if we wanted to change that. So now we've got a number of hotspots. So if we wanted to bump this up, you could do that. So that just gives you more starting spots. And then if we go back to our motion type, go back to directional. So now if we change our angle, and see how that affects our burn. And then you can adjust your raggedness. Okay, so we've got one last thing I was going to show you here. And this is our big bonus at the end. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to titles, and I'm going to come over to titles, and I'm going to select text, and I'm going to pop this over. So this just gets popped above whatever video clip or spot on the timeline you want it. So we can come in here and we can make a few changes. Let's say we want to make it a little bolder. We change the color, and maybe we're going to come in and maybe add a little outline to the text or a stroke. Maybe even a little bit of a drop shadow. Oh, that's a little bit too much. Okay. All right. So there's our text. Won't bother getting any fancier than that with it. And if you want to see more of the things you can do with these text tutorials, I've got another video that does a deep dive on text, which you can find right up there. I'll also put a link in the description so you can find that video if you want there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab that push effect. So we're going to go to video transitions, and we're going to go down and look for push. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag that push, and I'm going to stick it right on the end of our text. Now this is going to be 30 frames, which I don't want it to be that long. So I'm going to drag this down to, let's say 10 frames. Okay, so a third of a second. So now that push transition, we can come in here and we can say, okay, I want to push that text up from the bottom, and I want to ease it in, or actually I want to ease it out. Okay. So now if we scroll through that a little bit, you can see how that's popping it up. So just a real simple basic animation using a video transition. Isn't that a nifty little trick, eh? Okay, now the next thing we can do is we want to animate this out as well. So we can select this transition. Let's move that playhead, it's causing me problems. So we'll select that transition, and we're going to hold our Alt key down. If you're on a Mac, it'll be the Option key, and we're just going to drag this over. Now it doesn't look like anything's happening, but it actually is moving. When we get to the end, it shows up. Okay. Then we can move our playhead over top, And we can select this, and then I can switch this to a push down, and then I can ease in. Okay, so let's take a look, see what that looks like. So there it pops in, and then it'll pop back out. Easy peasy. And because we've added a little easing, it's a more natural look. Now we forgot to add some motion blur, so we can come in here and we can add a little motion blur. So let's just go 0.1. And you can just type it in directly. All right. Now the beauty of this is we go in here somewhere in the middle and we go back here and we select video, which actually selects our title. So now we can adjust our position if we want to. So if I want it starting or stopping at the top, like so, right, I can adjust that. So now our animation will just move to that new point. No muss, no fuss, really easy to do. And the other really good thing about this is if I want to make this text stick around longer, it defaults to 5 seconds, but I can drag this out to say 8 seconds if I want. And the animations get stuck to the ends. So it just makes life so much easier, far easier than doing keyframe traditional animation. It's something you can use quick and easy. You can drop a little sound effect in there. So if I wanted to go into my power bin, I could grab my fast whoosh and I can line that up. I can make a copy, line it up with the other end. And now we've gotten a little bit fancier. Like so. Doesn't that extra little sound effect just really sell it? It does for me. I hope you like those couple of bonuses and the little dive we took into video transitions. The next DaVinci Elements, we're probably going to cover generators, things like adjustment clips and colored panels, stuff like that. We'll take a little bit of a dive into that in the next DaVinci Elements. So if you enjoyed our video today, make sure to hit that like button. And if you didn't like it, hit the other one too. And if you're not already subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. That really helps us out. And if you don't want to miss any future videos, make sure you hit that notification bell. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And YouTube is going to show you some upcoming videos that it thinks you might want to see. And they're going to show up over there. I hope. I tend to get this wrong. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today. We'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.